Of sanctions by the European Union over Syria have come into force. The new round of measures targets Syrian companies, but also members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Another 4 high-ranking Syrian officials were put on the blacklist, which includes 30 people. The Syrian president and his brother are topping that list. Well, let's talk more on this development with journalist Nabila Ramdani, who's in London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So the EU and the US, well, they keep threatening Syria only with sanctions, but do you think these measures will have any influence on Assad's regime?
I don't believe so at all. I think any further economic sanctions on Syria will have almost no impact whatsoever on the current situation in Syria and on the current crackdown. Let's not forget that Syria is already subject to American sanctions, including aid restrictions and export bans. The EU has recently put economic sanctions on the country as well, and has gradually extended those sanctions to members of the Al-Assad family, including the president himself, and that hasn't proved to be enough to deter the Al-Assad regime from cracking down on peaceful demonstrators who are determined to perhaps bring about change in the country and mainly have access to more freedoms.
So why this soft approach to Syria in comparison to Libya, which of course is now being rained on by plenty of bombs by NATO every day? So is this really a case of the West not really wanting Assad to go?
I think Syria has exposed, in fact, the double standard in the international community's approach to all these revolutions sweeping across the Arab world in the Middle East. Let's not forget that the NATO went to war against Libya because it feared that there would be a potential killing of innocent civilians in Benghazi. Now we are witnessing an actual massacre taking place in Syria, and yet the international community has been rather cautious in its reaction towards Syria because of its crucial strategic position in the Middle East. Israel is of course one of its near neighbors, and close friends include countries like Iran, and Iran is said to be playing a role in the crackdown in Syria.
So sorry to interrupt, just to ask you then, so therefore what you're saying is if Assad does go, he's the one who really is in some effect holding the country together with regards to stability in the region. But if he does go, if that regime does collapse, it could lead to civil war, and then what?
Well, I think the international community, the West and the Obama administration in particular, has an interest in maintaining al-Assad in power. It is faced by a dilemma because Americans' interests in the region are yet again challenged. Of course, it would welcome President al-Assad to go if somebody else could come in that would sustain and indeed maintain Americans' interest in the region. But that is unlikely to happen because when the moment you have you introduce democracy in a country, then the clout and the weight of the public opinion is of course much more important, and I don't think that the public opinion in Syria would be willing to support Americans' interests in the region.
What about this development where we understand that EU sanctions are also targeting members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? What does that mean in the way that Iran is involved here? What are the implications?
Well, the implications are that there are very close ties between the Syrian regime and indeed the Iranian regime. As I said, the Iranian regime seems to be very much involved in suppressing the opposition movement in Syria. So basically the international community would like to, is very cautious in its reaction towards what's happening in Syria because it doesn't want Iran to become involved on a much bigger scale in the region.
But of course it also means not just Iran getting involved, but we understand the tensions between Turkey and Syria over the refugee crisis. Yet another country perhaps being drawn into this problem.
Very much so. I mean, Turkey has always been a very close ally to Syria, not least of all because they are trade partners. I have to say that the Turkish reaction to the refugee crisis has been very impressive, providing all the logistics to welcome what is believed to be more than 10,000 refugees who have fled Syria to find refuge in neighboring Turkey. So the refugee crisis epitomizes the critical point that of the situation in Syria.
Really interesting to hear what you have to say. That's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for joining us. Nabila Ramdani joining us live from London. Thank you.